Senator Kane and I have a policy where we start on time. You know, if everybody does that, then everyone shows up. If they don't, they won't show up. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And I'll have an opening statement, and you have an opening statement, and then we'll get ready to hear the presentations. And this is going to be very, very significant, this hearing. See if I can find it here. Yeah. Today we're joined this afternoon by Lieutenant General Larry Wyche. I'm sure that you've been around to see most of these members. Vice Admiral Grosklags, the Vice Admiral Thomas Moore, Lieutenant General Michael Dana, the Deputy Commander of the Marine Corps, and Lieutenant General Lee Levy, who's out in my state of Oklahoma at Tinker Air Force Base. I thank the witnesses for agreeing to testify today, and also thank Ranking Member Senator Kane for his leadership and partnership in this issue. We work very well together. We're old friends, and just last month, this subcommittee received testimony from the service vice chiefs on the current readiness of our armed forces. Now, that's what we heard last time in the first committee hearing that we had. And I remember one of the witnesses was going back, reflecting back, in the 1970s when we had a hollow force. And I think we even though it's not all that well defined, I think we have a hollow force today. I'm very much concerned about it. I think this is a very significant hearing to have from you folks, and I look forward to your testimony. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses. I do appreciate your service, and I appreciate you being here today as we take testimony that will help us as we start to work on the FY18 NDAA. We want to do it in such a way that we can restore full spectrum readiness as soon as we can. As my chair mentioned, and we do work well, we had a hearing last month and the vice chiefs laid out how the DoD continues to suffer from unacceptable level of full spectrum readiness. And we heard a mantra worth repeating today: DoD needs more predictable and stable funding. Readiness is a function of many things. Predictability is one of the key ingredients. The 5 witnesses today are going to help us understand the direct correlation between the readiness of maintenance facilities and the degraded operational readiness measured in terms of decreased training, flying, and steaming days. Specifically, I'm hoping to hear from witnesses about the impact that unpredictable funding has on workload planning and how the condition of a degraded shipyard or depot impacts the ability to retain skills, employees, engineers, workers. We have recruiting and retention bonuses for men and women in uniform, and for good reason. We need to make sure that we find ways to better retain and reward those serving at home and abroad. We often hear about how military platforms need modernization, and yet so does the infrastructure that maintains those platforms. So the deferred maintenance backlogs at shipyards, ammunition plants, air logistics centers, arsenals, and depots continues to grow and has been left unaddressed for a very long time. We have technology challenges. As we hope to modernize our organic industrial base, I think we should pay more attention to 2 key enablers that this important set of institutions, workforce and technology. This subcommittee and the DoD should work together to explore new ways for the shipyards and depots to recruit and retrain the highly skilled workforce they need now and in the future. Some of the models that we're using to support cybersecurity and laboratory R&D workforce can be used here as well. For example, apprenticeships, internships, the Scholarship for Service program for civilian service in the DoD, and exchanges with private industry all have a place to play in getting us with that workforce. We need to make better use of our innovative partners like DoD labs, universities, industry, and even places like DARPA to develop the new technologies to improve efficiency. I had a great meeting, Mr. Chair, with General Dana yesterday, and we talked about the growth of 3D printing as something that's really changing some of our functions in a good way. One of the first directives that the new administration put out that has concerned me was the federal hiring freeze, making a difficult problem worse, and I'll ask about that today. There are some exemptions, and yet even with exemptions, the hiring freeze impacts and even flies in the face of common sense, whether it's a child care worker in Germany or a commissary worker stocking shelves in Virginia or an engineer who doesn't have direct touch with platforms but nevertheless is critical to the development of platforms. Some of this impact has been felt. The hiring freeze, in my view, is an unnecessary layer of red tape at a time when we should be encouraging the next generation of Americans to weld holes at shipyards, manufacture gun tubes at an arsenal, write software code for the most advanced fighter aircraft on the planet. So we got to put ourselves in the shoes of high school grads and college undergrads. The hiring freeze that was announced was 90 days with TBD to follow, but if you're a youngster with a lot of talent and you're thinking about what you want to do and you look at a federal workforce that's going to be dramatically affected by hiring freezes, you would probably be smart to think about other lines of work. The bottom line is that the civilian workforce is just as dedicated to men and women in uniform. Many of them wore combat helmets before they were part of the civilian workforce, and we rely on them as many in the defense, industrial, and production facilities to help us succeed. And finally, I would just suggest again what I've been suggesting since I came to the Senate in January of 2013. One of the first votes I cast in February was to turn off the sequester. It was originally a deal to force us to find a budget deal, and it was sort of an interesting philosophy. In order to force ourselves to do something smart, we'll agree if we don't to do something stupid. I never really thought that was a good management technique, and when I came into the Senate, I said, let's turn it off and let's just make our budgets about advocating for priorities, and then when we decide upon priorities, we'll do budgets based on priorities rather than priorities based on budgets, or worse, priorities based on budgetary uncertainty. I think especially it's kind of an interesting time, a new administration, all levers of power, executive in both houses, in the control of one party. We could get rid of the sequester caps on both defense and non-defense, and then just make our case about what we think the nation should spend in these areas. And I would hope that we might have that discussion in the full committee. But for purposes of today, we're going to hear good testimony that will go into the record and help us as we get into the NDAA process. And I'm glad that my chair has called this committee and look forward to your testimony.
Good. Thank you, Senator Kane. Just so it will be in the record, when we first heard about the hiring freeze, and of course the exception being the military, we immediately got that corrected. Just take our depot in Oklahoma that General Levy is very familiar with. They only have one uniformed officer in the whole place. They have a couple thousand employees. You can't make ordnance. You can't fight a war if you're not making ordnance. So those areas had to be corrected immediately and were corrected immediately. Now, we're going to hear from each one of you guys, and we'll ask you to try to confine your statements to 5 minutes, and your entire statement will be made a part of the record. So we'll start with Lieutenant General Larry Wyche, Deputy Commanding General, United States Army Materiel Command.
Senator Inhofe, Ranking Member King, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the readiness of the Army's organic industrial base. On behalf of our Acting Secretary, the Honorable Robert Spear, and our Chief of Staff, General Mark Milley, thank you for your support and demonstrated commitment to our soldiers, our Army civilians, families, and veterans. It is an honor for me to appear today along with my distinguished colleagues from the Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force. Since the War of 1812, our nation has reaped the rewards of the unique capabilities that reside in our organic industrial base. Today, 23 ammunition plants, depots, and arsenals produce combat readiness by manufacturing, repairing, and resetting our military's equipment. Our organic industrial base directly employs a skilled workforce of more than 22,000 people. Many of them are highly skilled artisans and craftsmen who deliver readiness while supporting operations impacting all 50 states. The organic industrial base is often referred to as America's national security insurance policy. As with all insurance policies, there must be sufficient coverage in advance of crises and the confidence that the policy will be delivered and honored. The organic industrial base represents the very best protection, paying dividends in the form of readiness now while providing the capabilities to regenerate equipment and unit readiness at the offset of future crises. The Army's organic industrial base serves to mitigate risks by providing strategic depth and scalable response during times of crises, by producing materials which includes ammunition, explosive, trucks, artillery tubes, tanks, helicopters, and much more. Our manufacturing base has always delivered state-of-the-art technology and equipment to our globally engaged forces. The two greatest challenges that we face today in our organic industrial base are budget caps mandated by the Budget Control Act of 2011 and the lack of consistent and predictable funding as evident by repeated continuing resolutions. The longer the Army operates under the budget cap in an unpredictable fiscal environment, the more difficult it is to sustain production and retain a skilled workforce. We recognize the commitment and steadfast support by the committee over the last 16 years. Without your support, the organic industrial base could not have surged when called upon in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. I would like to thank each distinguished member of this committee for allowing me to offer this testimony today. Your continued steadfast support enables us to maintain and modernize our organic industrial base while simultaneously preserving and developing the workforce required to provide value to our nation in the form of readiness. General Milley states it so succinctly: the #1 priority for the Army is readiness. The foundation of Army readiness is a responsive industrial base. Thank you.
Thank you, General Wyche. We'll now hear from Vice Admiral Grosklags, Commander, United States Naval Air Systems Command.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Kane, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today to discuss specifically, in my case, naval aviation and some of the readiness challenges that we face. I know those challenges, as you mentioned in your opening statement, are no surprise to this subcommittee, as both the Vice Chief and the Assistant Commandant testified to that effect about a month ago. About our aviation depots specifically, and we call them Fleet Readiness Centers, so I might use those terms interchangeably. They are a critical element in our overall readiness recovery plan. They are continuing a steady recovery from fiscal year 13 primarily, and the impacts of furloughs and hiring freezes associated with sequestration, to your point, Senator Kane. But also they're recovering from years of limited and uncertain funding. Today, they're also increasing their workload. The demand on them has actually never been higher. 16 years of wartime activity, the challenging material condition of the aircraft that are coming in the front door, as well as the extension of our aircraft service lives well beyond what we had originally planned to utilize them to. A case in point that I think most of you are familiar with are our F-18 A through D models. And while we will always remain challenged as long as we're flying with our F-18 A through D models in terms of keeping them ready, we have stabilized that particular depot production line. We've become predictable in our delivery of those assets back to the fleet. And by the end of this year, beginning of next calendar year, we will have met the fleet's requirement for in-service or in-reporting F-18s. So while we're turning the corner there on F-18s, as I mentioned earlier, the overall workload continues to increase as we see increasing demand signal for V-22s, H-1s, other type model series, as well as component repair via our supply system. But it's also important that we all recognize that getting our depots back up on step really only addresses one piece of the readiness equation. We have to be equally focused on our supply support, our maintenance planning, our maintenance publications, our support equipment, the training and qualifications of our sailors and Marines who maintain these aircraft, and I could go on. But those things are just as important as our depot capabilities. And the funding for those efforts is through a variety of individual line items, and we collectively tend to call those our enabler accounts. And as the department has struggled to balance our competing requirements and limited resources for the last number of years, funding in these accounts has been severely constrained. And I can tell you that readiness has suffered as a direct result of that lack of funding. In our fiscal year 17 request, the department has taken a major step forward toward addressing the required funding for these enabler accounts. The request for additional appropriations further augments that request and our recovery efforts. Because of that, if we end up operating under a full year continuing resolution, there will be a significant negative impact to our ability to continue our overall naval aviation readiness recovery efforts. As you said, Senator Kane, in your opening, stable, predictable, and sufficient funding is absolutely critical to our readiness recovery efforts. So I look forward to working with this subcommittee to that end, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Grosklags. We'll now hear from Vice Admiral Thomas Moore, United States Navy Commander, United States Naval Sea Systems Command.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the 73,000 men and women in the Naval Sea Systems Command, I thank you for the opportunity to discuss the health of the industrial base and its critical role in maintaining the readiness of our fleet. The Naval Sea Systems Command's #1 priority is the on-time delivery of ships and submarines to the fleet. At any given time, about 1/3 of the Navy's fleet is undergoing either a major depot maintenance availability in one of our 4 naval shipyards and private sector surface ship repair shipyards, or conducting pierside intermediate maintenance. Our naval shipyards and our private sector partners are the cornerstone of that effort to deliver our ships and submarines on time, and the 33,850 men and women who work in our naval shipyards and the workers in our private sector partners today are true national assets. The high operational tempo in the post-9/11 era, combined with reduced readiness funding and consistent uncertainty about when these reduced budgets would be approved, have created a large mismatch between the capacity of our public shipyards today and the required work. This mismatch has resulted in a large maintenance backlog, which has grown from 4.7 million man-days to 5.3 million man-days between 2011 and 2017. Today, despite hiring 16,500 new workers since 2012, the naval shipyards are more than 2,000 people short of the capacity required to execute the projected workload, stabilize the growth in the maintenance backlog, and eventually eliminate that backlog. This manning shortfall, coupled with reduced workforce experience levels, and today half of my workforce has been in the naval shipyards for less than 5 years, and shipyard productivity issues have all impacted fleet readiness through the late delivery of ships and submarines. However, although we face many challenges, the challenges are not insurmountable. Years of sustained deployments and uncertain funding have created a readiness debt that we must begin to address today. In our naval shipyards and private sector, that begins with defining the full maintenance requirement, matching the budget to that requirement, ensuring the capacity to perform work matches that workload, and improving the productivity of our workforce through improved training and infrastructure investments that must be made to modernize our naval shipyards. We can and we must tackle each of these issues today and sustain that focus into the future. Only then will our industrial base be able to provide the readiness required of our Navy today and into the future. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral Moore. We'll now hear from Lieutenant General Michael Dana, U.S. Marine Corps, and Deputy Commandant, Installations and Logistics for the Marine Corps.
Thank you, Chairman Enoff, Ranking Member Kane, distinguished senators. First thing I'd like to start off with is a thank you. I've got Master Gunnery Sergeant Bauman right here. Master Guns, if you can stand up. That's 25 years of Marine Corps experience. I've got 36 years. And what I want to pass to you is in this entire time I've been in the Marine Corps, the American people and Congress has taken care of us. Everything from Desert Storm to Somalia to Iraq and Afghanistan, we've gotten everything we need, and we greatly appreciate the support. So I wanted to preface my comments by saying that because we do have a few asks. And we're combat ready to go. We're the fight tonight force. But there's 4 things I'd like to cover quickly. First, the accelerated aging of our equipment set. I said to Senator Kane yesterday, normally vehicles, MTVRs, trucks that would go 1,200 to 1,500 miles in a peacetime environment, we were racking up 15,000 to 18,000 miles per vehicle. So that accelerated aging induces a cost. Good news for the depot, Senator Producer, thanks for the great support there, but it generates work. Second is the complexity of today's systems. If you look at when I came in 1982, an M151 Jeep, very simple, little 4-cylinder, 16 to 18 miles a gallon. Problem was, though, not very survivable. So we came up with the MRAP. But the MRAP is a system of systems. And many of the combat platforms we have today are systems of systems. So you need more maintenance, more technicians, more money to keep those systems moving. Next is the gradual decline in depot funding. And we greatly appreciate the 80% that we get. In some cases, has been 84, 88. But we are very confident in our requirements. So when we generate 100% requirement for our equipment set, anything less than that leads to a gradual decline in readiness for that year. And last is the decline of our facilities. We've got 29,000 facilities in the Marine Corps. 4,300 of those are in poor or fair condition. But the Commandant, because he's the Commandant, he's got a plan, and we're executing that plan. It's an installation reset strategy, which I can talk to more in detail later, sir. But the bottom line is he wants us to help ourselves before we ask you for help. So when we come to you for requirements, sir, it is a hard and fast, fact-based requirement. So I look forward to the questions. Thanks for having us here today.
Thank you, General Dana. Now, Lieutenant General Levy, the second, United States Air Force, Commander of the Air Force Sustainment Center, United States Air Force Materiel Command, and very busy at Tinker Air Force Base.
Good afternoon, Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Kane, distinguished members of the subcommittee, like General Dana and my colleagues to the right. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to testify before you on the readiness of our United States Air Force. On behalf of our Acting Secretary, the Honorable Lisa Disbrow, and our Chief of Staff, General Dave Goldfein, thanks for your support and demonstrated commitment to our airmen, our Air Force civilian, families, and veterans. Without pause, your United States Air Force has delivered global vigilance, global reach, and global power for the nation. We're always in demand, and we're always there. We've supported joint and coalition forces throughout every operation, and we've secured the homeland through continuous surveillance and air defense. And we've done all this with a force that is now 30% smaller than at the outset of Desert Storm, and aircraft and infrastructure that continues to age and present new challenges. Literally, we are finding ways to do more with less. But your total force airmen, active duty, National Guard, Air Force Reserve, and our dedicated civil servants are amazing, and they continue to seek new and innovative ways to get the job done. Make no mistake, your United States Air Force is ready to fight tonight. But I'm concerned about our ability to sustain our Air Force to fight tomorrow. Threats to the nation and our vital national interests continue to evolve, adapt, present formidable challenges that threaten us and our allies. And as we develop advanced airspace and cyber capabilities for tomorrow, we must continue to adapt our readiness, sustainment, and logistics enterprise as well. As General Wyche said, the organic industrial base is the nation's insurance policy. It underpins our readiness to fight not only tonight, but be prepared to fight and to sustain into the future. The Air Force Sustainment Center underwrites this for our Air Force, joint partners, and allies. Our command has responsibility for nuclear sustainment and supply chain management for 2/3 of the nation's nuclear triad. Nuclear deterrent operations are the bedrock of our national security. Our command also has the responsibility to set, open, and sustain theaters in times of peace and conflict, and we're doing this with weapon systems across our Air Force that are on average age 27 years old. The defense industrial base is brittle. We find an ever-diminishing vendor base for sustaining our platforms and increasing challenges recruiting the kind of talent our Air Force simply must have for the future. A fifth-generation Air Force must have a fifth-generation workforce. From the logistics and sustainment portfolio perspective, all of the service destinies are interconnected. This is not a zero-sum game. Our nation's warfighting capabilities rise and fall together. We all must be fully functioning teammates, and when we enter the battle space, we rely on one another. For example, at Tinker Air Force Base, headquarters of the Air Force Sustainment Center, we are home for and sustain the Navy's E-6B Mercury fleet, a critical link in our nation's nuclear command and control architecture. We ship munitions for McAllister's Army Ammunition Plant from Tinker Air Force Base. You may be familiar with the Boneyard at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. While some call it that, I prefer to think of it as a national reservoir of aerospace capability. To that end, they are regenerating their F-18s from long-term desert storage to help with the Department of Navy's TAC Air challenges that you heard about a moment ago. While our team at Warner Robins Air Logistics Complex just outside of Macon, Georgia, are working hard making wing spars for that hard-to-replace part for the F-18 in a public-private partnership to help Department of Navy readiness. I could offer dozens more examples. While logistics and sustainment by itself won't win a war, it will absolutely lose you a war. The airmen of the Air Force Sustainment Center are predominantly civilian. Our ability to hire takes months, due to an antiquated hiring system. In an era where software engineers are becoming as essential to weapons systems sustainment as jet engine technicians, we simply must have a better system for recruiting and hiring our total force airmen for tomorrow. We compete with industry for a scarce commodity, STEM graduates, that the nation already does not produce enough of. This competition for talent has readiness implications for today and for tomorrow. Our nation needs to increase its investment in force structure, readiness, and modernization. When we do that, we have a full spectrum ready air, space, and cyber force to meet today's challenges and tomorrow. Our citizens expect this from us. Our combatant commanders require it of us. And with your continued support, our airmen in your United States Air Force will continue to deliver it. Thank you for having us today, and I very much look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, General Levy. Let's start with you, because I can remember 30 years ago, we were talking about the core competencies and the organic capability. And at that time, I thought it was rather arbitrary to come up with a 50-50. Well, that was 30 years ago, and we still are 50-50. But it seems to have worked, and a lot of people have not stopped to think about why it's necessary to keep this core capability. So just briefly, anyone who wants to answer the question as to why it is significant that we have that core capability, feel free to respond.
Senator, I'll start with talking about several one-of-a-kind capabilities within the organic industrial base that is unique to our organic industrial base, and that's Water Elite. Water Elite produces large caliber cannon tubes for the Navy, for the Marines, and at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, all of the houses there have these gun tubes. Those gun tubes are only made in this hemisphere. And so that is a very unique capability that you just cannot go and get out in industry. And that's why we need to reserve those unique core capabilities within the organic industrial base, Senator.
That's good. General Levy?
Yes, sir. So we find 50-50 to be extraordinarily useful, particularly when coupled with a core statute, because we think about what General Wyche said in his opening comment. The organic industrial base is the nation's insurance policy. That logistics and sustainment infrastructure exists to provide for the nation in times of war, to behave as that buffer and ability to surge. And when we find there's a healthy relationship between industry and the organic industrial base, what we find is that both sides improve their performance, drive down overall sustainment cost, and deliver best value capabilities for the warfighter, while at the same time preserving that critical insurance policy, if you will, that ability to surge for the nation. It also drives, and I mentioned in my remarks, the brittleness of the defense industrial base. It also drives a certain level of what I like to sometimes refer to as cooperation. The healthy relationship between commercial firms and the government activities in parts of the marketplace where there might only be one vendor.
Yeah, that's a huge point there, because we went through a period of time when we experienced such a thing. This has been a moving target. So I do appreciate that. It's an insurance policy, and I think we all agree. Just for clarification, Admiral Moore, when you were talking about your F-18 program, you were talking about just the Navies and not the Marines, is that correct? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sir, actually, speaking of both.
You were, because our testimony that we heard when we had the other hearing that I referred to in my opening statement, the Marines were 62% of their F-18s were down. What kind of a percentage do you have if you exclude those out of the rest of the Navy?
Let's see. I can tell you that I agree with that number for the Marine Corps. For the Navy, it's comparable. What I was referring to specific on the comment I made about the depots and kind of reaching the peak of our depot throughput requirement was the difference between the outer reporting aircraft, which are in our depots or long-term storage, versus those are on the flight line, which is the number that you're referring to is of the flight line aircraft, there are approximately 60% of those today that are not mission critical.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, the General Levy, when Congress was skeptical about the creation of the Air Force Sustainment Center, But here, I think that the concerns that were expressed at that time are pretty much answered by this time. But you're the one who's in a good position to respond as to why it's necessary and its success.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to address that. So I would tell you that from our view, the Air Force Sustainment Center creation has been a tremendous success. Let's just talk money, for example. In the 4 years since the Air Force Sustainment Center was created and we have begun to operate Air Force logistics as one common enterprise, we've been able to return $2.4 billion back to our United States Air Force. That's validated by the Air Force Audit Agency. That's money that goes back to addressing readiness and critical modernization challenges that our Air Force has. From a performance perspective, we've managed to cut flow days and improve safety and quality on all of our platforms. We now have B-1s at the shortest amount of flow days ever. We now have taken over the ability to do things, for example, when businesses go out of existence at Robins, when there was a vendor that went out of business that makes critical parts for the C-5, the Air Force Sustainment Center team at the Warner Robins Air Logistics Complex was able to rapidly internalize that and keep the C-5 readiness at the level we needed to be at. We were able to, for example, at the KC-135, with KC-135 MRO, go from 3 sources of repair, 2 commercial and 1 organic, to 1 source of repair, organic. Now, every KC-135 in the United States Air Force, about 76 a year, receive their program depot maintenance at the Air Force Sustainment Center at Tinker Air Force Base. All 3 of those locations at Hill Air Force Base, Tinker Air Force Base, and Robins Air Force Base operate as an enterprise. So if an F-15 comes into Robins for repair, the engine comes to Tinker and the landing gear goes to Hill. By operating as an enterprise, we find efficiencies, we find synergies, we drive our performance, and as importantly, we drive down cost to our Air Force.
Yeah, it was different back when I can remember when we had 5 ALCs and we made the step down to 3. So I think that is very significant. That's an excellent answer, Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a question for Admiral Moore about shipyard challenges. Shipyards are critical to maintaining fleet readiness and also supporting forward presence. And while there have been a number of success stories at our shipyards, there's also a lot of challenges that we've heard about. Loss of experienced workers, lengthy periods required to rebuild lost experience, aging infrastructure and IT systems. So I have 2 questions. First, what actions is the Navy taking to address long-term challenges at the shipyards that could affect our ability to complete maintenance on schedule? And second, how do we determine and measure the health of shipyard infrastructure? I've heard some of you guys use the term Fester factor when describing how a ship is doing, but how do you measure how a shipyard is doing in terms of being able to perform its maintenance tasks?
Yeah, sir. Thank you for the question. So to the first question, I think following the sequester in 2013, we've had a significant challenge, as you discussed, in getting our ships and submarines out on time. And it's a combination of things. So we've certainly run the ships harder since 9/11. We've had an inexperienced workforce. To your second question, which I'll get to, the infrastructure is really not a 21st century shipyard infrastructure. And then, frankly, we just didn't have enough people in the shipyards to do the work that was required to get done. We've taken some significant action over the course of the last year. There's more work to be done, and I think we're starting to see the lost days go down a little bit. So first and foremost, we've got to understand what work has to be accomplished on our ships and submarines. And so we've really worked hard to go back and at the Naval Sea Systems Command, look at our class maintenance plans, look at the work that's required and define what that requirement is, and then go back to the Pentagon and explain to them what work needs to get done. Then we have to be able to recognize that we just don't have enough workforce at the naval shipyards. And so it's not just a matter of them working harder. They're great national assets to us. But if you don't have enough workers to get the work done, you're inevitably going to get the ships late. So we have started to hire, and we've hired 16,500 new workers over the last 5 years. We're still about 2,000 people short, and I'm working very hard with the CNO to get to that number, and we need to get there. Along with that is a recognition as you hire all these people, a young workforce, that you've got to get them trained. And in the past, it would typically take 4 to 5 years to take a new shipyard worker and get them to the kind of a journeyman level where you could trust them to go work on a nuclear submarine or carrier. Today, we've invested a lot of money in our training system so that a young worker coming in today, and it takes them about 1 to 2 years to the point that they can actually provide, real wrench turning on the ship. And I think that's something that's really, really important to us. So improved training and the hiring processes that we have. To your second question on the health of the infrastructure, we've got to, across the board, we have a long list of things that need to get accomplished in the shipyards today. I've got to be able to figure out how to go make the case to make the investments in the naval shipyards. If I'm at Newport News Shipbuilding, I can incentivize them, and they can incentivize themselves to go buy new welding equipment, new cranes, et cetera, because it helps them on the bottom line and improves their cost performance. In the naval shipyards, we don't have the same mechanism. So if you were to go look at the shops and things of the nature that, I need new welding equipment, I need workflow processes that are better, I need improvements to the dry docks across the board. And those investments in the naval shipyards are going to be an important component to our ability to get the workforce to be more productive. It's pretty hard to demand the worker to get more productive when he's working with tooling that is 15 to 20 years old, whereas counterpart on the private sector is using something that's a lot more state-of-the-art. So it's a holistic plan that we've got to work across the board on, and you've raised an important issue with the infrastructure piece. It's something that we've tended to ignore and just focus on getting the right number of people in naval shipyards. But I would argue if you're just getting the right number of people in naval shipyards by itself is not enough. You got to give the workers the tools necessary to get the work done.
I just have a minute left, but others of you, could you weigh in on the workforce challenge? In other subcommittee hearings, we've heard about losing pilots to commercial aviation. In terms of hiring your own maintenance workers across your various portfolios, do you face increased competition from the private sector? Or talk a little bit about the workforce challenges that Admiral Morris just described.
Yeah. So I would say for the Marine Corps at our depots, we're blessed with a great workforce. You mentioned this in your opening statement. To keep them, what we're trying to do, and we're actually working it, is in terms of getting them additional skill sets. Because yesterday we talked a little bit about innovation in the workplace and at the depots with additive manufacturing, 3D printing, being able to do CAD diagrams. We're partnering with local colleges in the Albany, Georgia area. We're going to look the same in Southern California. Also at some of our bases with some of the coastal Carolina, but to provide these workers skill sets that they can use elsewhere. I mean, I know that sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but we feel that if we're showing that we're taking care of that workforce, we're giving those additional skill sets to excel in the 21st century environment, then they'll stay with us out of loyalty.
Sir, if I may, real quickly, our major 3 fleet readiness centers in North Carolina, Florida, and San Diego. San Diego is really the only one we have a challenge with in terms of hiring people. We have under-executed our hiring plan there for several years in a row, and it's largely due to competition for the workforce as well as the high cost of living out there. So we've turned to basically hiring bonuses, which has had a significant impact, positive impact over the last 6 months. The NDAA language this year in 17 that's going to give us some direct hiring authority, we believe will be very helpful once we've fully implemented that. And the other thing we're actually looking at trying to implement with OPM is some increase in locality pay. So we're making progress, but in that type of high-cost environment, we're just up the road in the Los Angeles area. You've got a very competitive aerospace industry. That is a challenge for us.
Senator, I would also offer that it's the entire team. So we tend to talk about the depot artisans, the jet engine mechanics, or the shipyard workers, but frankly, it's the entire team. It's the engineers, it's the firemen, it's the entire ecosystem. The quarterback without the rest of his or her team is simply not going to be effective. So it's challenges hiring across the variety of skill sets. But I would tell you, while we talk about things such as pilot shortages and other critical skill sets, I mentioned in my opening remarks, we simply do not produce enough engineers in the nation. We have a challenge across hiring them and keeping them. I have 3,600 engineers in the Air Force Sustainment Center. That's more than the Air Force Research Laboratory. And so we are in a close-in battle with industry to recruit and retain that kind of workforce. And they're absolutely essential. So it's really about the entire ecosystem for us. We also find that much like we talk about aircraft pilot shortages, we see shortages in some of the aircraft skills, avionics, electricians, jet engine mechanics, because many of those men and women come to us from military service. With the military services being smaller, producing fewer, and fewer American youth going into those lines of work to begin with when they come out of high school or going through VOTEC, that presents some additional challenges for us. But we partner very closely with all the colleges and universities and the VOTECs in the neighborhood of our primary installations. And actually, from an engineering perspective, we recruit nationwide to try to find the very best talent, because in a software-driven Air Force, as we move to that information age Air Force from that Iron Age Air Force, we have to have that kind of talent.
Mr. Chair, I'm over my time, but could General Wyche just answer the question too? And then, thank you.
Senator, in regards to the hiring freeze, it does create some challenges for us. Now, we are able to meet our mission requirements. If that hiring freeze is extended beyond 90 days, it will have an impact on us recruiting a workforce, getting them in place so they can continue to deliver those weapon systems. Senator, you can recall back in 2013 when I was at Fort Lee, when we went through sequestration. That was not a good time for our employees at Fort Lee and our Army. With regards to the industrial base, we lost 7,000 employees. And in McAllister alone, they lost 167 employees that never returned to McAllister because they went to other industries, such as the oil industry. And we're at that point where we're just beginning to recover from that. And so we're working through that, through those, but the hiring freeze does have some challenges that we're working through.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here and testifying today on our industrial base and the critical role that it plays in our military readiness. I recently visited Iowa's Army Ammunition Plant, which is a government-owned, contractor-operated facility in my home state, and their ability to rapidly increase workload and provide a stable supply of ammunition is a key part to our national security. However, due to their dependence on the Army to modernize the facility, their techniques, the manufacturing techniques, are behind. This isn't something I blame the contractor for. They've put forth a proposal for the Iowa ammunition plant that could save the Army and taxpayers $18 million per year, paying for itself in less than 5 years. The cost-saving decisions currently sit with the Army. So, General Wyche, this is for you. What is the Army doing to modernize its GOCOs in order to help drive down production costs and cut overhead?
Senator, we are doing a couple of things. First, we've identified the requirements, and we know that to maintain the facilities, just to keep them from being degraded, it would cost us approximately $100,000 a year. And to get them at an acceptable level with the modernized capabilities, it would cost us another $300 million for the next 10 years.
Okay.
Ma'am, if I could,
Yes.
help out my Army brethren on this because they help us with ammo. But I made a trip to Lake City, which is one of their large ammunition plants in the Midwest. It was just fascinating about that facility is half the facility had equipment from 1942. And I own a lot of weapons, not in D.C., by the way, but I load my own ammo.
Don't admit that now, right?
But if you look at how they work in the plant, it's just like they did in 1942 with the primers and the primer powder. I mean, it's very dangerous work. But then the other half, because the Army's great initiative, is they went to automated in the plant. So they retrained that workforce to go from the guys and gals have been doing it for 30 years one way to where they're doing automated machinery, and they're doubling the output. And, you know, one of the questions was, hey, how can the industrial base meet that requirement for ammunition? Well, I think the Army is doing a great job of that.
Yeah, and hopefully we can modernize and get to that point where we're not losing that workforce, but we're stabilizing the supply as well as growing that supply with demand as necessary. So I appreciate that. In 2015, the GAO came forward with 3 recommendations to ensure we sustain the critical capabilities found at our arsenals. The first, issue implementing guidance for make or buy analysis when it comes to DoD procurement. Second was to identify fundamental elements of a strategic plan for the arsenals. And the third is to develop and implement a process for identifying critical capabilities at arsenals and the workload needed to sustain those capabilities. The department has concurred with all of those recommendations, but, as of this morning, they have not followed through with any of those recommendations or produced the reports necessary. So I've been through the Rock Island Arsenal, and I've really witnessed what the men and women are doing at that arsenal to contribute to our national security. This is taking a long time, and General Wyche, again, when will we see the reports that have been required, specifically the critical capabilities assessment and the guidance on make or buy?
Senator, that particular area of make or buy, that I would have to come back to you on the record with that particular answer, because I'm not prepared to answer that question.
Okay, I would appreciate that, because that is very concerning, especially to the folks at the arsenals.
Yes.
They'd like to see those reports as soon as possible. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for testifying, and I feel as though with sequester and with the budget caps, et cetera, that we're just doing a lot of catch-up. So I thank you for what you're doing with what we've provided to you. And many of you have mentioned how hard it is to recruit and retain our workforce. That is a critical part of our industrial base. And at the same time, how important it is that the men and women who do the work have modern equipment. And so, of course, at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, I'm always concerned about whether or not they have the tools in which to do the job. And so I just am thankful that you continue to emphasize those aspects. General Levy, you were one of the people who mentioned about recruiting and retaining, and I'm just wondering, the people with STEM backgrounds. So are you doing anything special to recruit women? You can start, and if any of the rest of you, because women drop out of the STEM fields at every point of the continuum. And unless we do something very specific targeting the women and girls and minorities into these areas, it's just not going to change very much. So are you doing anything particular?
Yes, ma'am. And
recruiting women?
thank you for asking that question. So I often tell people, how long does it take to grow a STEM worker for an air logistics complex? About 21 years, from about here all the way till he or she graduates from university and is ready to come be one of our civilian airmen. So we have a variety of programs where we do outreach to females into minority or disadvantaged areas. In fact, last year alone, my engineering community did 60,000 hours worth of community outreach to try to develop interest in STEM curriculum throughout different parts of the communities where our bases are located. Obviously, it tends to be in the area where our facilities are located.
Did you say you're starting at an early age, as in middle school, elementary schools?
No, ma'am, as in elementary school.
Okay, that's great.
Because if you don't imbue them with that desire for STEM early, and if you don't give them the passion for learning and the intellectual curiosity, and also if the state educational systems don't have the ecosystem that delivers things like high school physics and calculus and that sort of thing, then they're certainly never going to go to university and be be an engineering graduate. We also financially support, as well as support with volunteer time, the Starbase program at all three of our primary installations, which is another science and technology. I would sort of refer to it as a learning camp for young boys and girls to get them interested in STEM career fields and hopefully spark that interest.
Are we doing similar kinds of outreach for the Army and the Navy?
Senator, if I could, our program with Nav Air is very similar to what General Levy just described. The other thing I'd add is through our Executive Diversity Council at Nav Air, we have separate advisory groups, one for women, one for Hispanics, one for African Americans, one for Asian Pacific Islanders, and on. And part of those advisory groups' major focus is exactly on recruiting within those either ethnic or gender groups, and have had very good success in doing that. As somebody alluded to earlier, then we have to keep them. And one of our challenges is keeping them because there's a very competitive marketplace.
Yes, realize that. Anybody else?
Yes. Yes, Senator, we have several outreach programs at each one of our 23 arsenals where the commanders are personally engaged, they're visiting colleges, identifying those potential students who would like to come work at our arsenal. One program that we're really excited about is our AMC 1000 program. That is a program where we set a goal to hire 1,000 summer interns, 1,000 per year for the next 5 years. In the last 2 years, we have been able to reach that goal. So we're very excited about that program.
So your summer intern program, are they targeted to minorities and women?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
I congratulate you for your efforts, and in fact, because I know this is such a need area for, not just, of course, for our military, but across the country, we have a need for thousands, hundreds of thousands of people with STEM backgrounds. So I do have a couple of bills that I'd introduced that I'll send you copies of that focuses on supporting more minority and women in these fields. In the few seconds that I have left, Mr. Chairman, the President has called for a significant increase in the number of ships. So I wanted to ask, this is for Admiral Moore, how would a Navy of 355 ships impact the current capacity of our public shipyards?
Oh, thank you, Senator, for the question. Yeah, we've already started to look at what that would take. The plan to get to 355 that we've laid out in our force structure assessment gets us there in the mid-2030s. And so we will need to grow the size of our naval shipyards. We'll have to grow the size of the private sector that's building the equipment today. And we're also going to have to remember that up at the headquarters level, where we're providing technical support and oversight and technical manuals, et cetera, we're going to have to grow all those. So the time frame between now and 2035, as long as there's a stable and predictable budget that goes along with that, we can manage to grow the workforce. The Navy has been at that size before, and we were able to maintain the force back then. If it's done in a sustained way, we can certainly grow the force to get there. We've already taken the steps to start take those plans as we start to grow the force.
So if you already have these kinds of plans and what it would take to get to this number, could you share those with our committee?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your service to our country. I think sometimes we get into the middle of the discussion on everything else and we forget that it's gentlemen like you that make this whole thing work, and we appreciate what you do and we appreciate what your teams do. One of our challenges is that we need to be in a position to supply you with the materials and equipment that you need. When you make reports back to us indicating that there are times in which even the equipment that you have right now, you're not able to maintain appropriately because the funding isn't there, it's something that we have to highlight. I'd like to begin with talking about the USS Boise, and I know that in your opening statements for the record, Admiral, or Admiral Moore, you had based the fact that you had to make a determination yet as to whether or not a nuclear-powered submarine would basically remain at dock because we didn't have the dollars available to get it in and to get it up to speed to actually be able to dive again. Can you share with us just exactly what's going on with that, why we've got that kind of a problem with a nuclear submarine, and how in the world we ever justify having an asset of that value sitting at dock and not having the resources available to maintain it in the seaworthy condition?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question, Senator. So in the Boise situation, what happened is, this is the issue with the naval shipyards, is we didn't have enough workforce to get the work done. And our typical behavior in the past, and there's a couple submarines in the yards right now, USS Asheville, it was in Hawaii, and USS Albany, who's also in Norfolk, an availability that would typically have taken 22 months. And we inducted them into the shipyards anyway, knowing that they didn't really have the workforce to work on the availability. And so the net result was that the submarine would stay in the shipyard for 48, 49 months. And so that is, if you're the crew of the Asheville or the Albany, and you've been told, hey, this is a 22-month availability, and you're in that naval shipyard for 4 years plus, you can imagine what it does to morale and retention. So in the case of the USS Boise, we were faced with the similar situation. We did not have the capacity at Norfolk Naval Shipyard to do the work. And when I came as the Naval Sea Systems Commander, one of the things that I talked with Navy leadership about was, hey, look, we have to be realistic about that we don't have the capacity to get the work done. And when we face something like Boise, we've got to, we've got to recognize that sticking it in and just letting it sit there pierside for 4 to 5 years is really not the way to do it. And so in the Boise's case, we made a decision to not put it in the shipyard because I didn't want it to sit there for 4 to 5 years. The downside of that is nuclear submarines have very specific maintenance that has to be done on them in order for me to certify that the ship is safe to submerge. And so you're exactly right. We've taken a submarine, even though it's an active duty submarine, so essentially it's not available for the nation's use. We've got to be able to get out in front of this. We've got to be more predictive about the work.
Admiral, and I appreciate your comment, but what I'm curious about is why do we find ourselves in that position? Is it a matter that we didn't have the money to pay the bills to get it done?
Yeah,
Or is it a matter that we didn't have the capabilities and we just didn't see it far enough in advance?
Yeah, we didn't have the capacity, so there's two things. One, we should have been more forward-looking and anticipate that we know when these submarines are going to come in and be able to say, hey, I don't have the workforce necessary to get that work done. And then, because it takes me 2 years, from the time you give me $1 to go hire a worker, it takes me two years to get that person.
So does that mean we didn't get the money to you in time?
No, I think it's not a matter of you getting to the money at a time. It's a matter of competing resources within the Navy and the Navy's decision on what was going to be in the budget at the time. So in particular, when we submitted the budget for FY14, that's probably would have needed the resources in order to have the money in order for me to go higher up to where I needed to be at Norfolk Naval Shipyard in 16. So it's a terrible situation on Boise, and we need to make sure that going forward, we get the capacity in the naval shipyards right, and we work with our private sector partners at Electric Boat and at Newport News Shipbuilding in a one shipyard concept, so that if we know we're not going to have the capacity at a given time, we work with them so that they, in fact, if they have the capacity, they could do the work. In this particular case, Electric Boat's going to do the work probably on the boat, but it's going to be in 2019. So we're going to take a submarine and going to sit at pierside for about 3 years.
So that means then that the captain who was perhaps on his way through a process in which he spends time someplace besides at sea, which impacts not only his ability to move forward with his career, but everybody on that ship is now delayed as well. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. It's going beyond just to the personal level of the ship and the crew itself. We're going to take a submarine, and if you're assigned to that submarine for the next 3 years, you're not going to go out to do what we've trained you and what you love to go do. So that's something we've got to go work on, and we can't let the Boise example happen again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I want to echo what Senator Rounds just said. I mean, a lot of times we get to the problem without thanking you guys. I'd like, just as importantly, for you to take it back to your teams as well, that it's not lost on us that we've lived in utter peace here in the homeland for quite a number of years. Even though we've been deploying, we know what's involved in that. So we thank you all for that. I have two concerns. I'm an old supply chain guy, so I've sat in your seat. I understand what you're up against. This didn't just start in the last couple years. I mean, we've had 3 periods of disinvestment in the military in the last 50 years, the 70s and 90s in the last decade. But this time it's really serious because it comes on the back of the recaps that happened before then in each of those times. Actually started from a higher point. So the disinvestment in the military this time actually started from a depleted point to start with. We had burned up a lot of our equipment, deployments were longer, and we ended up in a weaker position before this disinvestment started. So I've got 2 concerns. One is our workforce, organic workforce, what I call your depot and your shipyard workforces. And 2 is the supply chain. The supply chain has 2 things, I think. One is your ability in your shipyards and depot to turn around maintenance. But the bigger one, in my mind, is as our platforms, and this is true across the board, whether it's air, sea, or whatever, I mean, the assets that we have, the major platforms are all maturing at very similar times. And yet the startups have been delayed such that if I look at it honestly, and we don't talk about this much, but we have a gap in capacity that's anywhere from 1 or 2 years in some platforms to as much as 10 years in other platforms. It's a major problem. The up-tempo that we're experiencing in the last decade contributes to that. So I have 2 quick questions. General Levy, I know you've talked about this last year in committee and in private about your workforce. And because of those conversations, I think in the NDAA last year, there was a direct hire authority put in place. So how long does it take you to hire a systems engineer, a mechanic, a scientist today?
That's a great question. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. So first, I would like to say thanks for the direct hire authority that was signed into law in the
And where are we in
NDAA.
implementing that?
So the OSD draft policy or draft guidance was submitted to the services on the 20th of March, required back to them on the 3rd of April. Then, once they approve that, then the services will begin implementing the direct hire authority. And as you recall, it was a 2-year authorization. And so we look forward to coming back to you all in the future, telling you how the direct hire piece of this is working. So we aren't there yet because that's recently enacted legislation. With respect,
These are policies inside the service, correct?
yes, sir. So enacted in the NDAA, signed in
Right.
December. That's a new authority for all of us.
Right.
So OPM, I apologize. OPM had to write some guidance. They distributed it to OSD, who then has now created some guidance. They've asked the services to comment, with the comments being due on the 3rd of April. So I expect that we'll be able to have the guidance to do the direct hire here in the weeks ahead.
So how long does it take you to hire those guys today?
So today, it takes on average 148 days to hire somebody. In fact, I pulled the numbers this morning because this is important to me, right? This
very much
is
is,
essential.
isn't it?
The human beings that work on these platforms, whether they're engineers or jet engine mechanics or firemen or somebody who works at a daycare center, they're all equally essential.
Sir, when you
I need 'em all.
identify that retaining somebody, and this is true in business as well as military, finding somebody and retaining them are two different things. You find somebody, if it takes you 148 to onboard them, you lose a lot of candidates during that process.
Yes,
You
sir.
have to. So you're perpetually finding new candidates to start another clock of 148 days.
Yes, sir.
I mean, that's a disaster waiting.
It's very close. It's very difficult to close that circle.
So I will tell you in business, to hire these people today is 30 to 45 days tops. 90 days for a CEO, someone at your level in business today. If I started a search as a board member, it'd be 90 days. If I didn't have an answer in 90 days, I'd be after somebody's job. But this is how far out we are in terms of being competitive. So tell us what we need to do as you onboard that procedure. Please keep us involved, because this is one where you've got a great standard to look at, because it's the very places you're competing. I'm going to be out of time, but Admiral Moore, I want to get to one other question, and that is the supply chain. As these big platforms, the reason I want to ask you, you've got the aircraft carriers, you've got the SSBNs, these are major platforms over long periods of time. The federal government does not have a capital budget. We just don't. I don't know how we actually commit industries to build these huge platforms without a long-term plan. So the inconsistent start-stop of these budget conversations that we have in Congress, tell us the impact that that's having on this domestic supply chain for these major platforms. And you could talk about the air platforms too, the F-35, F-22, and the follow-on maintenance that's required to keep those things going.
Yeah, thanks, Sam, for the question. I mean, a lot of times we focus most of our effort on this when we have budget unpredictability at the Tier 1 yards, the people that are actually building the ships and the submarines or doing the maintaining. And I would tell you, if you're if you're a Northrop Grumman or an Electric Boat, and you've got the cash reserves to kind of absorb a little bit of that. But where it has the bigger impact is at the Tier 2, at the supply chain, the people that are providing the cabling, the pumps, and the valves. And so the unpredictability in the budgets absolutely has significant challenges for us in terms of being able to maintain somebody that's providing a pump or a valve, or you name it, to our ship or a submarine. And they don't wait around long. If it's unpredictable, they'll go do something else, because they're running in a cash flow environment that doesn't allow them to absorb losses for very long. And so it's certainly a major concern to us, and it's something that I'd like to focus on when we talk about the budget unpredictability, is that these are the people that really get impacted. And then when they drop out of the business, it just means less competition, which it's kind of a vicious cycle, which drives our cost up in the end.
Thank all of you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I do have one second round question. Do you have any other questions you wanted to ask? Would
You can be here all day, sir.
Why don't you, if you want to keep going, you can. I have one quick one that's kind of a wrap-up, but feel free, since I've got to stay here.
So, Senator Kane and I have closed plenty of these committee meetings together. He has a Marine that's in harm's way today, and I know how serious he takes this. I grew up at Robins Air Force Base, and I've been to Albany many times. I've still got the mud from the Columbus area under my nails, so I know where you guys have had footprints. I'm very concerned about, we have now moved into, it looks to me like, a military position posture that where deployment is going to be sort of the watchword of the day. We closed 15 bases in Europe in 2015. I think that number is directionally correct. We haven't had a major BRAC here in terms of our facilities matching the requirements. In your opinions, and I'd welcome anybody to on board this question, and that is, with regard to our footprint here in physical plants, General Dana, you said, and you summed it up best. I mean, you said, here are the problems: aging equipment, complexity of today's systems, decline in depot funding, and a decline in our facilities. So the question I have is, are our facilities in the United States and abroad matching this 4+1 mission requirement it looks like you guys are geared up to try to deal with today? That's so different than the 1-to-1 mission requirement we had over the last 50 years.
Yes, sir. Thanks for that question. We've got 33,000 Marines forward deployed right now, 22,500 west of the date line and special MAX.
He's got one of them himself.
Yes, sir. We had that very great discussion yesterday. As you look at our infrastructure, I can speak for the other services, but in terms of the Marine Corps, we think we're in a good place in terms of the number of facilities we have, especially if we go to anything above a 185 force, to be determined by funding, of course. But in terms of the infrastructure itself, I mentioned that we had many facilities that were poor and failing condition. I just quickly want to talk about this. We're looking very hard at the entire portfolio. We have one command, Marine Corps Installation Command, that looks at all our facilities and develops a consolidation, demolition, refurbishment, and new build plan that the commandant makes a decision on how that goes. So in the past, it was somewhat stovepipe, sir, and talked about, your great unity of command and your command, same thing with us on the installation side. So we're making those dollars go the farthest when we create that, literally a master plan for the entire Marine Corps and how it beds down.
Do you guys outsource to each other? You do?
Yes, sir. We're a tenant at Fort Leonard Wood.
Right.
And other places. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm asking, if you have depot limitations in certain places, certain depots are, I look at the F-18s, for example.
Yeah.
We've got a lot waiting on major depot maintenance. But there are other depots that might have excess capacity. I know you look at this all the time in terms of the cost of making that depot apply to another need, but is that ongoing? Are those things you guys are always doing?
Yes, sir.
We do our tanks at Anniston. They do a great job.
Our helicopters that are done at Corpus Christi Army Depot. We do Marine F-35s and Navy F-35 work at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. We talked earlier about the F-18 work that we're doing for the Navy, not only at Davis-Monthan at the Boneyard, but also at Robbins Air Logistics Complex. We do the Navy E-6 work at Tinker Air Force Base. So we do Navy and Marine F-35 engines at Tinker Air Force Base. So yes, sir, there's a lot of cross-pollination that occurs here.
That's right. Not only saying the physical part, but we do a lot of sharing ideas. Lee invited me out to Tinker, and that's an absolutely 21st century depot, great processes, reduction in cycle time. We got a lot of lessons for that for Albany and Barstow.
Well, General Wyche and General Levy owe you 2 beers after today. You've been bragging on all these guys today. So thank you, Senator Kane.
Thank you, Senator Perdue. Just really one last question, and it's a good closer. So in your current lane, what is it that most keeps you up at night? In any particular order, just we'd love to hear from you.
Senator King, I'll start with the lack of predictable, consistent funding. Because when we do not get that, we cannot plan our workload, we cannot plan our production schedules, and so that is very important to us. And equally as important, it creates concern within among our employees, because they want stability in their lives. And Senator, back to your comment on the supply chain. There's concern also in the supply chain. We monitor approximately 4,000 suppliers that we deal with. And in our analysis, we have identified 1,000 of those suppliers at medium to high risk to going bankruptcy. That is very important as we continue to provide the readiness for our Army.
Just go down the row here, sir.
Grosklags.
The 2 things, if I might, one on topic and one perhaps slightly off topic. The readiness of the Naval Aviation Forces is the number one. as we alluded to some numbers earlier.
We had some powerful testimony about that at the last hearing, too.
Sure. So I won't go into a lot of detail on that. You're well aware of it. The challenge I mentioned in my opening statement and that General Wyche just mentioned is about stable funding and getting the funding up to the level we need. We have clear data that shows as funding started to decline back in the 2009-2010 timeframe, our readiness on the flight line, mission-capable aircraft, full mission-capable aircraft, dropped in exact correlation with that reduction in funding for those enabler accounts that I mentioned earlier. So that's one. The other one that's also related to the other part of my business, which is the buying of new stuff, the acquisition piece. And there we're just too slow. And it continues to bother me that we can't collectively accelerate that process. And a number of initiatives that we're working on, I'd be happy to share with you at another time.
Great, thank you. Admiral Moore.
Yeah, sir, I think keeps me up at night is not having another Boise. I mean, we have the smallest fleet we've had in a long time. Getting these ships and submarines back out to the fleet, out there in the operating force, is critical to the Navy's readiness, to the nation's readiness. And when we have something like Boise, or we deliver George H.W. Bush 5 months late out of availability, the impact of that is that the young men and women who are out there wearing the uniform are having to deploy longer and stay on station longer. And so it's not lost on me that at the end of the day, my job to get these things out on time really impacts our ability to keep these young men and women safe and get them back to, on deployed turnaround times that make sense.
Thank you. Thank you, General Dana.
Sir, two quick things. First, we track 19 platforms in the Marine Corps: shoot, move, and communicate. Only one of those, the assault amphibian vehicle, is being replaced. Where I'm going with this is deferred modernization, is because we need new systems in the future, because as I talked about the accelerated aging, these systems are going to wear out at some point. The second one, not exactly in my lane, but gentlemen to my right have this lane, but as you look at the capability development system in the military, okay, which is a Robert S. McNamara, very Ford Motor Company type system, it's not keeping up. I went to Singularity for a week to the executive course. You look at those folks out there, they're turning product in weeks and months and maybe 18 months. So I mentioned yesterday Local Motors, a company here locally, that literally from idea to design to fielding of the equipment, they're doing it in anywhere from 3 to 13 months. That's the future, because the enemy in the future, I mean, we're coming out of an industrial age, okay, where it's all big iron. Now we're going into space and cyber 5-dimension fight instead of a 3-dimension fight. We're going to need to be able to manufacture capabilities a lot faster. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Yep. General Levy.
Thank you, Senator. So to General Dana's point, our adversaries also iterate that fast in terms of modernization. Our adversaries can go from concept to hardware on the ramp in 18 to 24 months. So from a modernization perspective, we all have a pretty considerable need for modernization, but it's not just the new platforms, it's the speed at which we field them. To your direct question, Senator, about what keeps me awake at night, it's stable and predictable funding. Since I manage the supply chain for the United States Air Force, when I don't know when I'm going to get my money, I can't tell suppliers when I'm going to spend that money. And to General Wyche's point, we drive businesses out of business. It's not what we're here for, but when the average fleet age of the United States Air Force's platforms are 27 years old and 21 of the 39 fleets can qualify for antique plates in your state, sir, that tells me that the supply chain and the ability to have that available to us to sustain those older platforms is absolutely essential. The funding that drives the human beings, the infrastructure, the MILCON, all of the components that it takes to generate that readiness, that all stems from a stable and predictable funding stream. So that coupled with the modernization challenges for our Air Force are the two things that really give me pause.
Senator Perdue has heard me give this lecture in budget, and he and I are kind of on the same page about this. On budgets, I'm a real certainty freak. Having been a mayor and governor, I learned that anybody can adjust to a number more than they can adjust to a question mark. And even if they don't like the number, they can adjust to a number, but a question mark is tough, and especially if the question mark is not only a question mark about the amount, but about when I may know when the question mark is going to be filled in on an amount. And I continue to believe we made an enormous mistake at the end of the last calendar year. We were very close to having an omnibus bill done that would have been essentially a 10-year full appropriation, not only in the defense category, but in everything else. The incoming administration, I can understand why they did this. They're about to take the helm, and they want their thumbprint on rather than somebody else's. But they said, don't do it. Go ahead and adjourn on the 10th of December, even though you have the time to do an omnibus. and do a CR through April 27th. Well, what that did is it put them in a box where when they came in, they had to then turn around and do a budget for the rest of FY17 and work on an FY18 budget. A new administration working on just an FY18 budget is plenty to take on their shoulders, but they complicated the work by telling us to recess and go home on the 10th of December when we could have gotten an omnibus bill done and still had plenty of a fine Christmas vacation. So we made a big mistake, and what we ended up doing was not giving you certainty. So we got this CR that goes through the 27th, and we're not, I mean, we're sitting here, Senator, I don't really know exactly what's going to happen come the 27th of April, and we're in the middle of the discussion about the FY18 budget too. So we ought to be giving you and giving everybody more certainty, and even if you don't like it, even if you wish the number was different than the number we give you, at least we can give you something that you can plan and adjust around. And that's really been on us. And this is something that I know Senator Perdue shares my views about this being both on budget and armed services. We owe you better than we're giving you on the predictability score. And hearings like this kind of have a way of reminding us that we got to step up our game a little bit. So thank you so much for what you do, for your testimony, and we will look forward to taking this into account as we're working on the NDAA. Hearing is adjourned.